Former President Donald Trump is now a convicted felon.
Donald J. Trump is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election.
That is the decision of a 12-person jury in New York City. Here's Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg.
And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor.
This is the first time a former U.S. president has been found guilty of a crime. Trump is also the presumptive Republican nominee for president.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
How will the decision shape the 2024 election in Georgia?
And where does Trump's Georgia criminal case stand? I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas.
I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali, and this is Plugged In, a WABE politics podcast. All right, Sam, what's been the reaction so far to this monumental verdict?
Trump spoke to reporters after he exited the courtroom.
We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution.
He repeatedly called the trial rigged and disgraceful and falsely said the Biden administration was behind the effort to prosecute him. The Biden campaign responded swiftly with a statement from Communications Director Michael Tyler. He wrote in part, quote, "In New York today, we saw no one is above the law. There is still only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box."
So staying in New York, what happens next?
Trump's sentencing hearing is scheduled for July 11th at 10 a.m. That is just a few days before the Republican National Convention kicks off. Appeals are very likely going to be filed by Trump's legal team, so this is not over yet. Now, I want to talk about the politics. We've already heard Trump undermining the verdict and using it to galvanize his supporters. Now the question is, will Joe Biden focus on the conviction on the campaign trail and also at the upcoming debate between Biden and Trump in Atlanta at the end of June?
And Sam, I wonder if this will resonate with voters, or are most people locked in on how they feel about the former president?
You know, Rahul, it's unclear if the criminal charges, the indictments, shifted the views of many voters, but now will an actual conviction change that? An NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll out this week found that roughly 2/3 of voters said a guilty verdict would make no difference to their vote, though about 17% said a guilty verdict would make them less likely to vote for Trump. You know, last year I talked to voters in Alpharetta right after Trump was indicted here in Fulton County, and I heard a range of opinions. People who thought he would not be held to account and they wanted him to be, people who saw the prosecutions as a political witch hunt, and then people who were not really following them much at all. I also wonder if this conviction will have the same impact as maybe a conviction would have in the Georgia or DC cases focused on efforts to undermine the 2020 election result. You know, while the New York case does deal with efforts to shape the 2016 election, the through line is less clear-cut as when Trump tried to disrupt the transfer of power in 2020.
So let's shift to the political reaction here in Georgia. A Republican Congresswoman and Trump supporter, Marjorie Taylor Greene, posted a picture of an upside-down American flag in her first post on X. And by the way, it was both on her official congressional account and her personal account. And generally, for those who don't know, an upside-down flag is either considered a sign of distress or protest. Democratic Congresswoman Nikema Williams, who is also the chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia, she put out a statement, quote, "Convicted felon or not, Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for president, and Georgians cannot afford a second term of our freedoms being ripped away by an unhinged and even more dangerous candidate, unquote. We also heard from Governor Brian Kemp, who has said he will vote for the Republican nominee. This is what he posted on social media. Quote, "From the beginning, this prosecution and trial have been driven by partisan politics. Despite today's events, the ultimate verdict is up to the American people on November 5th, when they will have a clear choice on the future of our country."
Now, Trump is facing criminal charges in other jurisdictions, Washington, D.C., Florida, and of course, here in Georgia. None of these cases seem likely to go to trial before the 2024 election.
So that means the New York case may be the only one before voters head to the polls. Sam, what is the status of the Georgia election interference case?
Well, first, a reminder. In August, a grand jury in Fulton County indicted Trump and 18 others in a massive racketeering case focused on efforts to overturn the 2020 election result in Georgia. 4 have pleaded guilty. The others, including Trump, have pleaded not guilty. Now, the case is chugging along, but it has a near zero chance of trial before the election, or even really this year. That's due in part to slowdowns in the federal election interference case. More on that in a moment, but also because Trump and other defendants pushed for DA Fani Willis to be disqualified from the case after they accused her of a conflict of interest. A judge allowed Willis to remain on the case, but now the Georgia Court of Appeals has decided to take up the matter, and given the typical timeline on those type of appeals, a trial this year is basically impossible. Now, when a trial does happen, Trump's prior conviction in the New York case could be something that prosecutors highlight at trial. It could also affect jury selection or even sentencing should Trump be convicted eventually here in Fulton County.
And we should mention there's also the U.S. Supreme Court. We're waiting for a ruling from the High Court on whether the presidents are immune from prosecution for actions they take while they're in office.
This is an issue in both the Georgia and federal cases focused on Trump's actions after the 2020 election. If this question on presidential immunity is returned to a lower court, that basically eliminates the possibility there will be time to get these cases to trial before November. We're currently awaiting a decision from the Supreme Court sometime this month.
Time for a break. This is Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast.
Welcome back to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast.
So, Sam, I want to talk about some of the other developments in this space. We're talking about the status of the Georgia election interference case. This week, pretrial hearings got back underway, and on display were the continued efforts from one defendant to sow doubts about the 2020 election result.
Former Black Voices for Trump leader Harrison Floyd is facing 3 felonies for allegedly pressuring an election worker into falsely admitting she committed fraud. Floyd's attorney, Chris Kachuroff, wants Fulton County to produce records telling the judge they'll prove the case is meritless.
I would submit to Your Honor that all of this will likely be unnecessary because there is no false statement.
Kachuroff and the county disagree about how to produce the records. County Attorney Chad Alexis highlighted one request, roughly 800,000 absentee ballot applications.
If we're talking about printing, we're talking about redacting, and we're talking about reprinting, because just that process alone is going to take thousands of hours.
Multiple audits, recounts, and investigations have already affirmed the 2020 results.
So, Sam, I also saw that attorneys for Republican State Senator Sean Still are asking a judge to toss out most of the criminal charges against him in the Georgia election case. Now, Still was indicted along with former President Trump and others, but the senator's proceedings were paused because we were in the state legislative session.
That's right. Before Still ran for Senate, he signed onto a slate of electors for Trump, even after Joe Biden won Georgia. Still's attorney, Thomas Beaver, says the charges against his client are faulty.
I've seen nothing other than Sean Still thinking that when he walked out of the room, he did what he was supposed to do as an elector.
A grand jury charged Still with 7 felonies, including racketeering and impersonating a public officer. Here's prosecutor Will Wooten.
Not knowing that what you did is illegal is not a defense to what you did.
Now, Still is up for re-election this year in his Forsyth and Gwinnett-based district. His Democratic opponent, Ashwin Ramaswamy, is highlighting Still's criminal charges.
Now, on another somewhat related trend that we've been keeping our eyes on is some Republicans refusing to certify the 2024 primary results. What's going on here, Sam?
A Republican member of the Fulton County Board of Elections is refusing to certify the May primary results and is now actually suing for access to more election records. Now, typically before certifying, the election director is asked to confirm that the results are correct.
Do the election summary results provide a true and accurate count of the votes cast in the Democratic general primary? Yes, they do. I'll take a motion to accept those.
On that vote to accept and certify the results, the board voted 4-1. 4 yes, 1 abstention. That abstention was from Republican Julie Adams.
The BRE is currently window dressing.
Adams says she could not verify the integrity of the count without seeing for herself more documents. Democratic member Aaron Johnson, though, said the vote is just ministerial, that it's not up to the board to independently vet these results on their own.
Certification is to move us to the next step. It's not something that ends today.
Now, in Georgia and other states, the certification vote is mostly clerical, and disputes are handled later in the courts. But increasingly, Republican board members have viewed these votes as a chance to raise baseless concerns about fraud. In 2020, Trump lobbied local boards against certifying results in some swing states that Joe Biden won. And now in 2024, the Georgia State Election Board is drafting a rule that may explicitly allow these local boards to not certify. Democrats warn that this could allow boards to just toss out votes that they don't like.
And Sam, before we go, I want to talk about another thing that I've been keeping my eyes on in the voting space, and that's the mailing of absentee ballots. There's been a slowdown in mail delivery due to a reorganization by the United States Postal Service, and that's really been affecting a new distribution facility in Palmetto, Georgia, south of Atlanta.
Right, and Rahul, you're actually sitting there right now after U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff visited that facility. You spoke to the senator about these mail slowdowns and about the concerns when it comes to voting in Georgia.
So let me explain what happened here. The Postal Service reorganized and consolidated mail processing to this facility right here. When it came online in February, there were significant delays in the mail. On-time delivery of first-class mail dropped down to the 30% range. Now, as you mentioned, Senator Ossoff was here earlier. Here's part of what he had to say about his visit.
I inspected this facility. I sat down with local USPS leaders to gain additional information about the causes of abysmal performance in Metro Atlanta and North Georgia. And what became even clearer is that this transition for our region was not well thought through, not well planned, and not competently executed.
Ossoff continues to point the finger at Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. On-time delivery of first-class mail is up to 58%, but that's still down from 88% at this time a year ago. And, you know, the issues around the delivery of medications and, of course, the mailing of ballots are two things that Senator Ossoff talked about. Local postal officials are saying they're aiming to be on track by mid-June, but we do have early voting and absentee balloting for the June primary runoffs. That includes the Republican primary for Georgia's 3rd Congressional, along with key local races like DeKalb CEO and Clayton County Sheriff. Look, you and I have both heard from election officials who are saying, look, request your absentee ballot early or consider in-person early voting or election day voting.
That's all the time we have on this historic day for this edition of Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. You can get more Georgia politics online at wabe.org/election2024.
Plugged In is a production of the WABE Politics Desk. Our producer is Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
And do us a favor, hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. We'll be back next Friday.